There comes a moment when you realize something uncomfortable. Nobody is coming to save you, and worse, most people around you benefit from you staying exactly where you are. Average, predictable, easy to understand, easy to control. And the cruelest thing you can do is to quietly stop being that person. Not with announcements, not with revenge, not with noise, but with silence. Real power begins the moment you stop explaining your growth to people who are comfortable with your weakness. You don't argue, you don't warn them, you simply change. While they sleep, you sharpen yourself. While they talk, you observe. While they doubt, you build. This is not cruelty for the sake of harm. This is survival. Machiavelli understood something most people refuse to accept. People respect results, not intentions. The world does not reward loyalty to your past self. It rewards transformation. So you become disciplined where you were careless, controlled where you were emotional, strategic where you were naive. And one day, they look at you and feel distance they cannot explain. That is the moment you know you have begun. If you understand this, comment below, I move in silence. Number 1. Invisible evolution. The mistake most people make is believing transformation must be seen to be real. They announce their goals. They broadcast their plans. They seek applause before results exist. And in doing so, they surrender their power. Because the moment people see your intention, they begin to measure you, doubt you, and unconsciously resist you. But the man who becomes untouchable understands something different. Growth is most dangerous when it is invisible. You do not need witnesses to evolve. You need discipline, quiet repetition, cold patience. You wake earlier without telling anyone. You learn without posting about it. You fix your weaknesses where no one can congratulate you. This is where real separation begins. Not in grand victories, but in small, daily decisions no one else sees. Machiavelli warned that familiarity breeds contempt. The more people think they know you, the easier it is for them to keep you in a box. So you step outside that box without asking permission. You stop reacting. You listen more than you speak. You reveal less than you know. And slowly, the version of you they understood disappears. This is why improvement unsettles people. Not because you changed, but because you changed without their involvement. They cannot track your progress. They cannot predict your next move. And unpredictability creates power. Dark psychology teaches that people fear what they cannot easily categorize. When you become calm, focused, and emotionally unavailable to chaos, you become difficult to manipulate. Understand this clearly. You are not improving to prove them wrong. That is still dependence. You improve because your future demands it. Because weakness is expensive. Because being underestimated gives you freedom to move without resistance. There will be moments when no one notices your effort. Good. That is your advantage. Let them believe nothing has changed while everything inside you is being rebuilt. Steel is forged in isolation, not in crowds. If this resonates with you, write in the comments, silence is my strategy. And remember this, the quieter your evolution, the louder your results will be when they finally appear. Number 2. Detachment is power. At some point, you must understand a harsh truth. Attachment makes you predictable, and predictability makes you controllable. The people who once knew how to reach you emotionally will try the same methods again, the same guilt, the same expectations, the same version of you they learned to manage. But you are no longer that person. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the moment you stop needing approval from people who never carried your burden. Machiavelli observed that men are quicker to forget the death of a father than the loss of inheritance. People protect their comfort first, always. When your growth threatens that comfort, resistance appears, not always openly, sometimes through jokes, doubt, subtle discouragement disguised as concern. This is where most fail. They slow down to maintain acceptance. They shrink to preserve relationships. But power requires sacrifice. You cannot become untouchable while remaining emotionally available to everyone's expectations. So you learn restraint. You stop explaining your decisions. You stop defending your ambition. Your energy becomes selective. Your time becomes guarded. And slowly, something changes. Peace replaces chaos. You react less. You observe more. You choose your battles carefully because not every challenge deserves your attention. Dark psychology teaches that emotional control shifts the balance of power. The one who needs less validation holds the advantage. When others try to provoke you and find no reaction, they lose influence over you. This is the turning point. The moment you realize walking away is often stronger than winning. If you feel this shift happening inside you, comment below. I choose distance over drama. Number 3. The disappearing version of you. There is a phase in transformation that feels strange, almost unsettling. The old version of you begins to disappear, but the new one is not yet fully formed. People sense the change before they understand it. Conversations feel different. Familiar places feel smaller. The roles you once played no longer fit. And this is where many turn back. Not because growth is impossible, but because isolation feels uncomfortable. Machiavellian thinking accepts this discomfort as necessary. Power is not born in familiarity. It is born in separation. When you stop reacting the way people expect, you interrupt their sense of control. The friend who relied on your compliance notices your silence. The critic who expected your insecurity finds calm instead. The dynamic shifts, and with it, their perception of you. You must understand something important. Improvement silently rearranges relationships. Not everyone loses access to you because you rejected them. Some lose access because you stopped abandoning yourself to keep them comfortable. This is not cruelty, it is alignment. The disciplined version of you cannot coexist with habits that once kept you weak. Dark psychology reveals that people unconsciously resist change in others because it forces them to confront their own stagnation. Your discipline becomes a mirror they did not ask to face, and rather than change themselves, many will attempt to pull you back into familiarity. They will remind you who you used to be. They will speak to the old you as if he still exists, but he doesn't. The man who seeks control over his life learns to let misunderstanding exist without correction. You do not rush to explain your evolution. Explanation invites negotiation, and your growth is not negotiable. Silence becomes protection. Distance becomes clarity. And slowly, something powerful happens. You stop seeking recognition altogether. You move differently because you no longer need validation to continue. Your standards become internal. Your discipline becomes automatic. What once required effort becomes identity. This is the moment when improvement stops being an action and becomes who you are. And once that happens, returning to your old self is no longer possible because you have seen what you are capable of becoming, and ignorance can never be restored. Number 4, the power of being underestimated. One of the greatest advantages you will ever have is being underestimated. Most people spend their lives trying to be seen, trying to prove their worth, trying to convince others of their potential. But the man who understands power knows that visibility invites resistance. When people believe they understand your limits, they stop watching closely. And that is where freedom begins. Machiavelli wrote that appearances often matter more than reality. The wise man allows others to believe what makes them comfortable while he works on what truly matters. You do not correct every misunderstanding. You do not rush to reveal your progress. You let results speak when the time is right. Until then, you remain calm, observant, and patient. There is strength in restraint. The moment you stop needing recognition, you become difficult to manipulate. Praise no longer distracts you. Criticism no longer weakens you. You move according to strategy, not emotion. And this unsettles people because they cannot predict a man who no longer seeks approval. Dark psychology teaches that expectations shape behavior. When people expect little from you, they lower their guard. They reveal more. They underestimate your discipline, your preparation, your resolve. And while they remain comfortable, you continue building quietly. This is not about deception, it is about control. Control over your reactions, control over your direction, control over when and how you reveal your strength. The loudest person in the room often holds the least power. Real influence belongs to the one who speaks less but acts decisively. Eventually, the difference becomes undeniable. The same people who overlooked you begin to notice the distance you have created, not through words, but through results. And by then, you no longer need their recognition because your progress was never meant for their approval. Number 5. Emotional discipline. Most men lose power long before they lose opportunity. They lose it in moments of emotion, anger that exposes intention, frustration that reveals weakness, the need to be understood that gives others leverage. Emotional discipline is not suppression, it is control. The ability to feel without surrendering direction. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes reality. The man who remains composed under pressure appears stronger than the man who reacts, even if both feel the same storm inside. When you stop reacting impulsively, people begin to measure their words around you. Your calm becomes influence, your silence becomes weight. This is where masculine stoicism separates itself from passivity. You are not numb. You are deliberate. You choose when emotion serves you and when it does not. Anger becomes fuel instead of explosion. Disappointment becomes adjustment instead of complaint. You stop asking why things happen to you and start asking how they can be used. Dark psychology reveals a simple truth. The person who controls the emotional temperature controls the interaction. If someone can provoke you, they can guide you. If they can guide you, they can limit you. So you remove that access, you slow down your responses, you observe patterns, you recognize manipulation not by words, but by repeated emotional triggers. Over time, this discipline creates distance between you and chaos. Arguments lose their appeal. Drama becomes exhausting rather than engaging. You no longer feel the need to win every confrontation because you understand that energy spent proving yourself is energy stolen from building yourself. There will be moments when people mistake your calm for weakness. Let them. Reaction would only confirm their expectations. Patience, on the other hand, allows outcomes to unfold in your favor. The man who waits, watches, and acts at the right moment often appears effortless, when in reality he is simply controlled. And something unexpected happens when emotional discipline becomes habit. Peace enters your life, not because the world becomes easier, but because fewer things are allowed to disturb you. Your focus sharpens, your decisions improve. You begin to move with intention instead of impulse. This is the quiet power most people never develop. The ability to remain steady while others exhaust themselves emotionally. And once you master this, very little in the world can move you without your permission. Number 6. The point of no return. There comes a moment when your growth creates a quiet separation between you and your past, not because you chose to leave everything behind, but because you can no longer return to thinking the same way. What once satisfied you now feels small. What once distracted you now feels like wasted time. This is the point where many feel loneliness, but it is not loneliness. It is transition. Machiavellian philosophy accepts that evolution changes alliances. Some people were meant for who you were, not for who you are becoming. And that realization can feel harsh. But power requires honesty. You cannot carry every connection forward if those connections demand you remain unchanged. At this stage, discipline becomes identity. You no longer force yourself to improve. Improvement becomes your default. You protect your time instinctively. You speak less about plans and focus more on execution. The need to impress fades, replaced by the need to progress. Dark psychology teaches that people become uncomfortable when they lose influence over you. They may test boundaries, revisit old dynamics, or remind you of past versions of yourself. This is not always malicious. Sometimes it is simply familiarity trying to survive. But you must recognize it for what it is: resistance to change. The untouchable man does not argue with the past, he outgrows it. He understands that looking back too often slows forward movement. Gratitude remains, but attachment weakens. You stop seeking closure from people who never understood your direction. And once this shift happens, something becomes clear. The path ahead may be quieter, but it is also cleaner. Fewer distractions, fewer compromises, more control. You begin to realize that becoming untouchable was never about others at all. It was about finally becoming someone your old self would not recognize. Number 7. Silence after ascent. By now you understand something most people never accept. Growth is not loud. It is repetitive, disciplined, and often invisible. The world celebrates sudden success, but ignores the long period of isolation that creates it. You begin to value that isolation. It becomes a place where your thoughts sharpen and your direction becomes clear. At this stage, temptation returns in a different form, not failure, but comfort. You have improved enough to relax, enough to slow down, enough to believe the work is finished. This is where many lose their edge. They mistake progress for completion. But the man who seeks control understands that maintenance is harder than transformation. Power must be sustained, not achieved once and forgotten. Dark psychology teaches that people reveal their intentions over time. Now you see patterns you once missed, who appears only when you succeed, who disappears when you struggle, who respects discipline, and who resents it. You stop taking these observations personally. Instead, you adjust access, not out of anger, but out of awareness. Not everyone deserves proximity to the life you fought to build. Your standards rise quietly. You tolerate less chaos, less drama, less wasted energy. Conversations become purposeful. Actions become intentional. You begin to recognize that attention is a currency, and where you spend it determines who you become. So you spend it carefully. There is also a calm that arrives here, a dangerous calm. Dangerous because it can make you forget how far you have come. The struggles that once defined you start to feel distant, but you do not erase them. You remember them as instruction. Every hardship becomes a reminder of what happens when discipline disappears. Machiavellian thinking is often misunderstood as coldness, but at its core, it is realism. The world responds to strength, consistency, and results, not promises, not potential. You no longer expect fairness. You prepare instead. Preparation replaces hope. Strategy replaces impulse. And with this mindset, you begin to move differently through life. You no longer chase approval or fear rejection. Both lose their power over you. You become selective with words, deliberate with actions, and patient with outcomes. When others rush, you observe. When others panic, you remain steady. This is the silence after ascent, the phase where improvement is no longer visible effort, but quiet identity. People may not know exactly when you changed. They only know that the version of you they once understood is gone. And the man standing in his place is harder to influence, harder to distract, and impossible to pull backward. You do not announce this transformation. You simply continue forward, knowing that the greatest distance you created was not between you and others, but between who you were and who you chose to become. Number 8. The final separation. There is a final stage in transformation that few talk about because it cannot be taught, only experienced. It is the moment you realize that the distance between you and your old life is no longer temporary. The habits are gone. The reactions are different. The things that once pulled you back no longer have weight. And with that realization comes a quiet understanding you cannot return. This is where many feel the urge to look back, to reconnect with old versions of themselves, to seek validation from people who once doubted them. But the untouchable man understands that looking back for approval is another form of dependence. You did not grow to be recognized by the past. You grew to escape its limitations. Machiavelli wrote that a wise man adapts to the nature of the times while remaining in control of himself. By now, control has become your advantage. You no longer rush decisions. You no longer react to every opinion. The noise that once distracted you fades into background sound. What remains is direction. Dark psychology reveals that people struggle most when they lose access to the version of you they once influenced. Some will attempt to re-enter your life through familiarity. Old jokes, old memories, old expectations. But you see clearly now, familiarity is not always loyalty. Sometimes it is simply habit trying to reclaim territory. So you make peace with distance. Not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Growth requires space. Space to think, space to move, space to become someone who is not constantly negotiating with the past. You stop explaining why you changed. Those who understand will not need explanation. Those who don't would never accept it anyway. At this stage, power feels different. It is no longer aggressive. It is calm. You do not need to dominate rooms or win arguments. Your confidence comes from preparation. From discipline repeated so many times, it no longer feels like effort. You become steady while others remain reactive. And this is the final separation. Not from people, but from weakness, from hesitation, from the need to be liked at the expense of being respected. You understand that respect often arrives quietly, long after you stopped asking for it. The road ahead becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. You know what to ignore. You know where to invest energy. And most importantly, you know that the cruelest thing you did was not leaving others behind. It was refusing to abandon your own potential any longer. Number 9. Never look back. At the end of this path, there is no dramatic ending, no applause, no moment where the world stops to acknowledge what you became. There is only certainty. The quiet knowledge that you are no longer ruled by impulse, fear, or approval. You move forward because forward is the only direction left. Machiavellian realism teaches that power is not in defeating others, but in mastering yourself. The man who no longer needs validation cannot be easily controlled. The man who no longer explains himself cannot be easily manipulated. You understand now that improvement was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about becoming someone who no longer negotiates with weakness. Some people will say, you changed. They are right. You became disciplined where you were careless, focused where you were distracted, silent where you once sought recognition. And the distance they feel is simply the space created by your growth. So you keep moving. No resentment, no announcements, no return to old patterns. Because once you see clearly, looking back only slows you down. The past served its purpose. The lesson is taken. The attachment is gone. You walk forward without noise, without regret, and without asking permission, untouchable. Not because the world changed, but because you did. There is a truth that only reveals itself after the transformation is complete. Becoming untouchable is not about separating yourself from the world. It is about separating yourself from the version of you that once accepted less than you were capable of becoming. And when that separation happens, life begins to look different. The same streets, the same conversations, the same people, but your perception changes. You begin to notice how many live on autopilot, reacting instead of choosing, drifting instead of directing. You see how comfort quietly replaces ambition, and how fear disguises itself as practicality. You remember who you used to be, the version that waited for the right moment, the version that explained itself too often, hoping to be understood, the version that tolerated situations that slowly drained energy because confrontation felt uncomfortable. And you realize something important: that person was not weak. That person was simply unaware of his own leverage. Awareness is what changed everything. The moment you understood that your attention, your time, and your energy were finite, you stopped spending them carelessly. Most people never reach this realization. They give their focus to distractions, their effort to temporary approval, their emotions to people who have not earned access to them. But once you see the cost of that behavior, you cannot unsee it. You begin to move differently, more deliberately, less urgently. You stop chasing validation because you understand that validation creates dependency, and dependency is the enemy of freedom. The philosophy behind becoming untouchable is often misunderstood. People assume it means becoming cold, distant, or unfeeling. In reality, it means becoming responsible for your own direction. It means accepting that the world does not owe you fairness, understanding, or recognition. Once you accept this, frustration loses its grip on you. You stop expecting others to act against their nature. You stop being surprised when loyalty fades under pressure or when people choose convenience over principle. And instead of becoming bitter, you become prepared. Preparation replaces hope. Strategy replaces reaction. You stop asking why things happen and start asking what can be learned from them. Every setback becomes information. Every disappointment becomes instruction. You begin to see life less as a series of emotional events and more as a process of refinement. Each challenge removes weakness. Each failure sharpens awareness. Over time, resilience stops being something you try to build. It becomes something you naturally possess. But there is a cost to this evolution. Growth creates distance, not always physical distance, but psychological distance. Conversations that once felt meaningful begin to feel repetitive. Complaints that once seemed important begin to sound trivial. You realize that many people are not searching for solutions, they are searching for comfort in shared stagnation. And when you no longer participate in that cycle, the gap becomes noticeable. Some will misunderstand your silence. They will assume you changed because you think you are better than them. In reality, you changed because you stopped negotiating with your own potential. You no longer shrink yourself to maintain familiarity. You no longer explain decisions that were made after long internal battles others never witnessed. And this quiet confidence can make people uncomfortable because it reflects choices they avoided making themselves. The untouchable man does not become emotionless. He becomes selective. Emotion is no longer scattered across every interaction. It is invested where it matters. Loyalty becomes intentional. Trust becomes earned. Presence becomes meaningful because it is no longer given automatically. You learn that constant availability reduces value, not because people are malicious, but because human nature adapts quickly to what is always accessible. As this understanding deepens, internal conflict begins to disappear. The constant debate between comfort and discipline fades. Action becomes simpler because your standards are clear. You no longer wait to feel motivated. You act because action aligns with who you decided to become. Motivation comes and goes, but identity remains. And once discipline becomes identity, consistency stops feeling difficult. You also begin to notice patterns more clearly. Who appears only when you succeed? Who distances themselves when you improve? Who supports growth and who subtly resists it? These observations no longer create anger. They create clarity. You stop trying to change people. You simply adjust proximity. Some remain close, others fade naturally. There is no drama in this process, only acceptance. Yet there is danger here as well. Strength can slowly turn into isolation if awareness disappears. Control can become rigidity. That is why reflection remains essential. The purpose of becoming untouchable is not to disconnect from humanity, but to stop being controlled by its chaos. You remain capable of empathy, but no longer vulnerable to manipulation. You remain capable of connection, but not at the cost of self-respect. With time, you understand that the world itself has not changed. People still judge, still doubt, still misunderstand. The difference is that their opinions no longer define your direction. Approval and criticism lose their emotional weight. You listen when there is wisdom and ignore when there is noise. Your identity becomes internal rather than external. And this internal stability creates a calm that most mistake for confidence when it is really certainty. This is what it means to never look back. Not erasing the past, but releasing its control over your decisions. You remember where you came from without longing to return. You carry lessons forward without carrying resentment. The struggles that once felt unfair become necessary steps that shaped your discipline. Even pain becomes useful when viewed through growth instead of victimhood. And eventually, a quiet realization settles in. The cruelest thing you did was not improving without others noticing. The cruelest thing, and the most necessary, was refusing to remain the version of yourself that was easiest to control. You chose responsibility over comfort, direction over distraction, growth over approval. Now, your movement through life changes. You speak less, but your words carry intention. You react less, but your actions carry weight. You no longer rush to prove anything, because proof exists in results. The urgency to be seen disappears, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing who you are without explanation. You continue forward without announcements, without resentment, without the need to be understood by everyone. The path becomes quieter but also clearer, and in that clarity, you realize that being untouchable was never about becoming unreachable. It was about becoming unshakable, not because nothing can reach you, but because nothing can pull you away from the standards you chose to live by.